The morning started as a sound. Not a song. Not a call. A kingdom-wide howl that rose and broke like something living, then carried across the ice flats on the wind. Nyra Valehart heard it long before she saw Whitegate hold. The storm had stripped her down to pain and stubbornness. Snow lashed her cheeks raw. Her cloak hung in ragged layers that did more to remember warmth than provide it. Every breath burned, sharp, metallic, too thin. Her fingers were past numbness now, locked into a trembling grip around the bundle pressed to her chest. She didn't loosen her arms. Not even when her knees threatened to fold. Not even when the wind tried to pry the weight from her like it had a claim. Because inside the bundle, something moved. Two tiny bodies, warmth fading, breaths shallow enough to miss if you weren't listening with your whole soul. Nyra tilted her head down, shielding them with the curve of her shoulders, letting her own heat bleed into them like an offering she couldn't afford. The walls of Whitegate finally surfaced through the whiteout, stone rising from ice, iron-laced gates, torchlight shivering behind battlements. Shadows paced the ramparts. Steel glinted. The kind of place that did not open for strangers. Especially not for an Omega. Nyra felt them smell her before they spoke. A ripple went through the guards above, heads turning, bodies tightening, hands going to weapons. The storm carried their voices down in sharp bursts. Stop. Don't come closer. Omega. That word hit like a thrown rock. Nyra didn't stop. She couldn't. Not with the weight against her chest growing lighter in the wrong way. She took one more step, then another, boots sinking into drifted snow, and forced herself into the circle of torchlight before her legs gave out. The gate guards aimed crossbows and spears as if she were a disease. "Where did you steal that?" one shouted, eyes locked on the bundle. "Show your hands," another demanded. "Drop it and kneel." Nyra swallowed, but her throat offered nothing back. No voice. No plea. Just frost and silence. So she answered the only way she could. She opened the bundle. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath with her. Two white-furred wolf pups lay against her, so small they looked unreal, snow-dusted lashes, ears folded, mouths parted as they fought for air. And wrapped around them was not scrap cloth or scavenged fur. It was royal silk, midnight dark fabric embroidered with the Fenro sigil. The Frostbound Crown's bloodline. The missing heirs. The dead queen's sons. The guard closest to her went pale like the snow. Someone stumbled backward. Another lowered his weapon as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "Run," one of them whispered. "Get the circle. Get the king." Inside the walls, the morning howl didn't fade gently. It cut off, mid-cry, like a throat being closed by shock. Boots thundered. Gates groaned. Torches flared as figures poured into the courtyard, and at the center of them came a man dressed in black mourning leathers, moving like a storm given a spine. King Auric Fenro. Nyra had never seen him before, yet she knew him instantly, not by crown or guard formation, but by the way grief had carved him hollow and still failed to make him small. He stepped into the torchlight, and froze. His eyes went to the pups. His face broke in a way pride couldn't stop. Then the king of the Frostbound Crown fell to his knees in the snow like the ground had betrayed him. Cairn, the name left him like prayer and wound at once. Solren. Nyra's arms shook. She should have been afraid. She should have backed away. She should have remembered what every pack had taught her. and Omega has no place in a throne's shadow. But the pups stirred at the sound of his voice, and then, impossibly, they turned. Not toward the king. Toward Nyra. Tiny muzzles pressing into her, as if her scent was the only map their bodies trusted. A strangled sound left Auric, half grief, half hope, violent enough to kill. He reached for them with hands that didn't know how to be careful anymore. Nyra moved to pass the bundle over. Their fingers touched. And something unseen tore open between them. Heat, wrong in the cold, ripped through Nyra's chest. The air tightened. Her vision fractured with memories, a queen screaming, a carriage splitting under steel, a child's cry swallowed by snow, then Nyra herself, alone, younger, bleeding, being shoved beyond a pack border as voices called her worthless. Auric's breath hitched as if he'd been punched by a ghost. Nyra swayed, the world tilting. In the stunned silence, with the storm hissing around the torches, one truth rose clear as a knife. Nyra Valehart hadn't dragged two princes home. She had walked into the heart of a kingdom built on lies. And something inside her had just been awakened to expose them. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the chapter where everything unravels. 5 days earlier. The world beyond the borders did not belong to anyone. Not to kings. Not to packs. Not to the Frostbound Crown. Out there, the snow decided what lived and what didn't, and it made its decisions without mercy, without reason, without witnesses. Nyra Valehart had learned that lesson young. She moved through the dead white woods with her hood pulled low and her shoulders tight against the wind, counting each breath like it was something she might run out of. The trees here were thin and black, bark split by cold, their branches reaching like skeletal hands. No birds. No tracks worth following. Just the hush of winter swallowing sound. She wasn't supposed to be here. That was the point. The packs kept their territories close and guarded. And Omega without a claim, without protection, without a name worth saying, she was meant to disappear somewhere between cast out and forgotten. Nyra had nearly succeeded. Her satchel held what she'd come for, winter roots, tough and bitter, the kind that could keep hunger quiet for another week. A few sprigs of frost leaf tucked beneath cloths so they wouldn't snap. It wasn't much, but it was survival, and survival was the only oath she still kept. She crouched near a half-buried rock, fingers digging into packed snow until they found the brown knot of root beneath. Cold bit through her gloves. Her wrists ached. She ignored it. Pain was familiar. Hunger was familiar. Being alone was familiar. What wasn't familiar was the feeling that started creeping up her spine, like the air had shifted around her, like the forest had turned its face toward something she couldn't yet see. Nyra paused, listening. Nothing. No footfalls. No growl. No wing beat. Just wind. Then the blizzard hit as if the sky had been waiting for her to look up. It came fast, too fast, white swallowing black, horizon dissolving into a single spinning wall. Snow didn't fall, it attacked. It shoved into her eyes and mouth and nose, filled the world until even the trees vanished. Any sane creature would have turned back. Nyra tried. She stood, turned toward the direction she thought was south, and took 3 steps before the storm erased her certainty. She spun again. The forest was gone. The rock was gone. The ground felt wrong beneath her boots, uneven, sloping. Her heart gave a hard, sharp kick. Ravine, her mind warned. She dropped to her knees and crawled, palms scraping ice, until her fingers found a jagged lip of stone buried under snow. One more step and she would have disappeared into the white. Nyra stayed low, breathing through the panic, and forced her eyes to focus. That was when she heard it. A sound so small it could have been imagined. A thin, breaking cry, high and weak, like a creature calling out with its last shred of instinct. Nyra froze. No one brought infants beyond the borders. Not in winter. Not ever. The wild took babies first. The cry came again. Nyra's throat tightened. Her body moved before her thoughts could argue. She crawled along the ravine's edge, one hand anchored to the stone, the other sweeping snow aside as she inched forward. The wind shifted, and the cry became clearer, closer. Then she saw a smear of color against all that white. Not blood. Clothes. A corner of fabric half buried beside a cluster of ice-crusted brambles, as if it had been tossed and forgotten. Nyra dug with shaking hands, pulling snow away in frantic scoops. The fabric came free, smooth beneath her fingers, far too fine for the borderlands. Even in the storm, it held a deep, midnight blue sheen. Royal silk. Nyra didn't know that yet. She only knew it didn't belong out here. She lifted it, and something inside the bundle stirred. A small body shifted, weak as a fading ember. Another tiny shape pressed close beside it. Nyra's breath caught hard. She peeled the cloth back with infinite care, as if sudden movement might break them. 2 wolf pups lay curled together. White fur, damp at the edges with melted snow. Ears folded. Paws the size of her thumb. Their bellies barely rising, their mouths opening and closing in the shallowest breaths she'd ever seen. They were newborn. Too young to survive even a night in winter, let alone a blizzard beyond the border. Nyra stared at them as if the storm had delivered a piece of impossible reality into her hands. "Why are you here?" she whispered, though the wind tore the words away. One pup made a tiny sound, more a tremor than a cry, and pressed closer to the other. Nyra's instincts screamed to leave them. Not because she wanted to. Because she understood numbers. She had one body heat. One cloak. One satchel. One chance to find shelter before the storm buried the world. 2 pups would mean slower movement, more exposure, more risk. And if she died out here, they died anyway. Nyra's hands tightened around the silk. Then she felt it, beneath the fabric, against her palm, a faint raised shape, embroidered with thread thick enough to hold. A crest. A wolf's head. A crown. She didn't recognize it. Not yet. But something about it made her stomach twist, as if her body knew the danger before her mind could name it. The pups shivered. Their noses were cold. Nyra swore under her breath, and something old and stubborn rose in her chest like a door slamming shut. She tucked them against her skin beneath her cloak. Instantly, their tiny bodies pressed toward her warmth as if they'd been waiting for it. Nyra sucked in a breath at the sensation, at the way it felt right in a way nothing in her life had ever felt right. She stood, hunched over them, and started walking. The storm tried to stop her. Snow drove into her face until her eyes streamed. Wind shoved at her shoulders like hands. Twice she lost her footing and went down hard, curling over the pups to shield them from impact. When she finally found a place to hide, it wasn't a cave or cabin or anything kind. It was the broken shell of an old watch post half collapsed into the ravine's edge, stone walls barely standing, roof long gone. Nyra crawled inside and used her own body as the last piece of shelter, back against the wall, cloak wrapped tight around the pups. They were still alive. Barely. Nyra dug her grandmother's pendant from beneath her shirt, fingers clumsy with cold. The hearthstone pendant wasn't pretty, just a smooth, dark stone set into a worn metal ring, hung on a cord that had been repaired more times than Nyra could count. Her grandmother had pressed it into her palm the night Nyra was forced beyond the pack's border. "If they ever tell you you're empty," her grandmother had whispered, voice shaking, "hold this and remember, you are not." Nyra had never known what it meant. She only knew the stone warmed when her skin touched it, not heat like fire, but something deeper. Steady. Alive. She pressed the pendant to the pups' backs. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the stone pulsed, so faint she could have imagined it, and warmth spread under her fingers. The pups shivered less. Their breathing steadied, just slightly, like a candle shielded from wind. Nyra sat there for hours, listening to the storm rage itself hoarse, feeding the pups melted snow from her fingertips, letting them nuzzle blindly at her skin for comfort she didn't know how to give. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time her eyes tried to close, she saw another memory, herself younger, kneeling in packed snow while alpha voices decided her fate. Worthless Omega. Broken. No scent worth following. No bond to claim. Nyra had survived because she stopped believing she deserved more than survival. So why was she doing this? She looked down at the pups. They were so small. So helpless. So alive. And something inside her answered, quiet and undeniable. Because someone left them to die. On the second day, the blizzard eased into a cruel, clear cold. The sky turned a hard, pale blue. The wind still cut, but now it carried distance, and Nyra could see far enough to know the truth. She was deep beyond any safe line. If she kept north, she would vanish into wilderness where nothing waited but starvation. If she went south. She didn't let herself finish the thought. She walked anyway. Day became a grind of steps and breath. Nyra moved with the pups wrapped tight beneath her cloak, checking their mouths for frost, rubbing their paws when they went too still, stopping every hour to press the hearthstone pendant against them. Sometimes, in the quiet between gusts, she thought she heard something else. Not the pups. A whisper of movement in the treeline. A shape too large to be a wolf, gone when she looked directly at it. On the third day, hunger made her hands shake so badly she dropped her roots into the snow and had to dig for them like a starving animal. Her lips cracked. Her feet burned, then went numb, then burned again. And she began to understand why the pups had been abandoned. Not by accident. Because the silk wasn't just fine, it was marked. The more she handled it, the more the embroidery became clear, the wolf's head crowned in ironthorn patterning, the stitching precise, costly, deliberate. Nyra had seen that crest once before. Not in real life. In a trader's battered pamphlet that had blown through her old pack's territory and been stomped into mud by a guard who spat and said, "That's the Frostbound Crown. Don't stare like you belong." Nyra had stared anyway. Now she stared again, at the same crest, wrapped around two dying princes. Her blood ran cold in a way the winter couldn't compete with. The Frostbound Crown's heirs had gone missing. Everyone knew that. Even outcast Omegas heard the rumors carried by travelers and soldiers, an ambush, a slain queen, a kingdom in mourning. Nyra had dismissed it as a distant tragedy. until it was breathing against her skin. On the fourth day, she stopped trying to pretend she had a choice. She was going south. Not because she wanted a reward. Not because she wanted mercy. Because if she didn't bring them back, the lie that placed them in her arms would remain buried under snow, and whatever kind of monster could do this would stay free to do worse. And because, quietly, frighteningly, she was no longer sure she was the one deciding. There were moments when her feet turned before her thoughts did. Moments when the wind seemed to open a path at the last second. Moments when the hearthstone pendant grew warmer, as if urging her onward. Compulsion. Instinct. Fate. Nyra didn't have language for it. She only had forward. By the fifth day, her voice was gone. Not stolen dramatically, just worn away by cold and dehydration until her throat could only rasp. She couldn't even curse anymore. She could only breathe and walk and feel the pups' tiny heartbeats fluttering like trapped birds. That was when she heard it. Faint at first. A sound that didn't belong to the wild. The distant, rolling grief of thousands of throats. A kingdom howling. Nyra crested a ridge, snow swirling around her ankles, and saw the black outline of White Gate Hold breaking the horizon, stone walls rising from ice, torches flickering like warning eyes. Her legs nearly buckled with relief so sharp it felt like pain. Then fear followed right behind it. Because packs did not welcome strangers. And kings did not welcome omegas. Nyra looked down at the bundle beneath her cloak. 2 princes breathed against her skin. She tightened her arms until it hurt. And she started down the slope toward the gates, toward the torches, the weapons, the truth waiting behind stone. Toward the moment that would either kill her or change the Frostbound Crown forever. Nyra woke to warmth that felt unreal. For a moment, she thought she had died in the snow and been punished with memory, heat on her skin, clean linen beneath her, the faint scent of burning cedar and oil lamps. Her body tried to sink into it, to accept it, to rest. Then she heard the sound. 2 small breaths. Not the wind. Not the storm. Breathing, soft and steady, like tiny waves against shore. Nyra's eyes snapped open. She was in a chamber carved from pale stone, its ceiling arched high and ribbed like the belly of a cathedral. A fire crackled in a wide hearth. Heavy curtains muted the light from tall windows where snow still fell in slow, relentless drifts. And beside her, on a bed far too soft to belong to someone like her, 2 white-furred pups slept in a nest of blankets. Cairn and Solren. They were clean now, fur fluffed, frost gone, their paws tucked beneath their chins. One lay curled on his side, mouth parted in a tiny sigh. The other had twisted onto his back, belly rising and falling with steady breaths. A healer's salve shone faintly along their ears and paws where cold had nearly stolen them. Nyra's chest tightened so hard she nearly couldn't breathe. Alive. Still alive. She moved, just a slight shift of her shoulder. Both pups stirred instantly. Their noses turned toward her before their eyes even opened, as if scent was sight and she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. Solren let out a soft whimper. Cairn pawed forward, blind and needy, and pressed his face against Nyra's wrist. Nyra froze. Something in her, something she hadn't possessed yesterday, answered them. A warmth rose beneath her skin, not the fire's heat. Something deeper. A thread pulling taut. The pups settled the moment her hand hovered over them. As if her presence clicked something into place. Nyra swallowed hard and lifted her gaze. She wasn't alone. A guard stood by the door in black armor trimmed with ash-gray fur. Another lingered near the hearth, silent, watchful. Neither had a weapon raised, but both watched her like she might transform into a threat at any second. And at the foot of the bed stood a woman with silver hair braided down her back, her eyes sharp as winter stars. She wore a healer's mantle, white linen crossed with dark leather straps carrying vials and herbs. "You're awake," the woman said, voice calm, practiced. Nyra tried to speak. Her throat produced only a rasp. The healer stepped closer. "Don't force it. Your voice will return. You were half dead when you reached our gates." Nyra's eyes flicked to the pups again. Then to the healer. "What are they?" she managed, the words scraped raw. The healer's gaze softened slightly. "Princes. And alive only because you were stubborn enough to be a fool." Nyra flinched at that, but the healer wasn't mocking. It sounded like reverence wrapped in irritation. "What happens now?" Nyra whispered. "That," the healer said, "depends on what you are." Nyra's stomach tightened. Her fingers found the cord at her throat by instinct. The hearthstone pendant wasn't there. Panic sparked hot in her ribs. The healer noticed. "Easy." She reached into a pouch at her belt and drew out the pendant. The stone looked darker here in the firelight, almost glossy. "I removed it when we treated you. I thought it might be cursed." Nyra held out her hand without thinking. The moment the pendant touched her palm, it pulsed. Not faintly, not subtly. The stone warmed like a heartbeat, sending a wave of heat up her wrist and into her chest. The fire in the hearth flickered, then flared as if it had inhaled. The guards shifted uneasily. The healer didn't step back. She leaned in, eyes narrowing with recognition. "Oh," she breathed. "So that's what you are." Nyra's fingers tightened around the stone. "It's just a pendant." No, the healer's voice was softer now, stripped of politeness. "It's a relic. An anchor." Nyra's pulse hammered. "Anchor for what?" The healer glanced at the pups, then back to Nyra. "For a bloodline we buried in lies." Nyra's skin prickled. "I don't understand." "You will." The healer moved to a small table and poured water into a cup. She offered it. Nyra drank, throat burning with relief. "My name is Celes," the healer said. "I serve the crown. And I have spent 20 years pretending the old stories were just stories." Nyra's grip tightened around the pendant again as if it might keep her upright. Celes stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the walls themselves might listen. "You were exiled," Celes said. "Branded weak. Unclaimed. Worthless." Nyra's jaw clenched. Celes's eyes sharpened. "You were not cast out because you were powerless." Nyra let out a harsh, humorless breath. "Then why?" "Because you were dangerous," Celes said simply. The words struck like a slap. Nyra stared at her. "I've done nothing but survive." "And that," Celes murmured, "is exactly what a trueborn Omega does." Nyra's stomach turned. "Trueborn Omega, that's a myth." Celes's gaze didn't waver. "So they taught you?" Nyra shook her head slowly. "Omegas are Omegas. We soothe. We bear. We obey." Celes's mouth tightened with contempt. That is what they turned you into. Nyra's fingers went numb around the pendant again as Sally's continued. Trueborn Omegas were not bred to obey. They were born to bind packs together. To amplify the alpha. To heal what should not heal and reveal what should not be hidden. Nyra's breath caught. Reveal? Sally's eyes flicked toward the door, then back. Emotion is not weakness. It is a force. A trueborn Omega is a conduit, life force, bond force, pack force. You don't just comfort. You connect. Nyra's mind flashed to the moment at the gates, the rupture, the flood of grief and exile and blood in the snow. Nyra swallowed. That thing with the king. A bond, Sally's confirmed. Old. Rare. And the fact that it ignited at a single touch means your blood recognized his. Nyra's skin crawled. I didn't choose that. No, Sally's gaze slid to the pups. But they did. Nyra followed her look. Cairn and Solren had shifted closer to Nyra's leg. Both slept again, but their bodies leaned toward her like flowers turning to light. Sally spoke softly. They imprinted. Nyra's heart stuttered. Imprinted, like a mother bond? Yes. Sally's voice carried weight now. And that makes you essential. They will not settle without you. They will not feed, they will not rest, they will not heal unless you are near. Nyra stared down at the princes as if seeing them for the first time. She had carried them for 5 days. She had poured her warmth into them. She had pressed the pendant against them, begged the world to let them live. Had she done it, or had something in them claimed her as she did? Nyra's throat tightened. What will the king do? Sally's gaze flickered, something like sympathy, something like warning. King Alric is a good man drowning in grief. He owes you his sons. But he also owes his kingdom stability. The words sank like stones. And the circle? Nyra asked, already knowing. Sally's jaw tightened. The circle of ash and oath does not like surprises. Especially not an Omega surprise. As if summoned by the name, footsteps sounded beyond the door, multiple, measured, important. The guard straightened. One opened the door without being asked. A cluster of figures entered. Nyra sat up too fast, dizziness swaying her vision. She forced herself steady, keeping one hand on the pendant, the other resting near the pups. Men and women in heavy cloaks and layered armor, some with silver braids, others with carved bone tokens at their throats. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp, their sense controlled. Power lived in them, not loud but undeniable. The circle. And behind them came King Alric Fenro. He looked worse in warmth than he had in snow. His hair was tied back, damp with melting ice. Shadows carved hollows beneath his eyes. His mouth was set in a line that screamed restraint. But his gaze went straight to the princes. Something in his face softened, broke, tried to rebuild itself. Then his eyes lifted to Nyra. The air thickened. Nyra felt it again, that thread, that pull, the strange sense of pressure behind her ribs, as if her body recognized him on a level it didn't have language for. Alric didn't step closer. Not yet. He held himself like a man keeping a beast chained by sheer will. Nyra Valehart, he said, voice low. That is your name? Nyra nodded. Yes. A woman in the circle spoke, her voice like frost. And you claim you found the princes in the wild. I did. A man with a scar down his cheek stepped forward. No escort. No witness. A rejected Omega stumbling out of a storm with the kingdom's heirs. Nyra's jaw tightened. Do you think I forged them out of snow? Several circle members bristled. Auric's eyes flashed, but not at Nyra. At them. Enough, Auric said, and the room obeyed the word as if it were law etched into bone. The woman lifted her chin. Your Majesty, with respect, if she is a trap. She saved my sons, Auric cut in. And brought them to your door, the scarred man countered. Convenient. Nyra's pulse hammered. She didn't know these people, didn't know their games, but she recognized what was happening. They were trying to turn gratitude into suspicion. Sally stepped in smoothly. The princes have imprinted, she said. That landed like a blade thrown into the room. Murmurs. Shock. Disbelief. Auric's head snapped toward Sally's. Explain. Sally's didn't flinch. They will not come unless she is near. Their heartbeats spike when she moves away. Their bodies respond to her scent the way pups respond to their dam. Nyra watched Auric's face tighten, grief and hope and anger all colliding behind his eyes. One of the circle members hissed, That's impossible. Sally's lifted the pendant slightly. So is this. Nyra's stomach dropped as the circle's gaze fixed on the hearthstone pendant. Recognition flickered through several faces, the kind of recognition people wore when they'd been taught to deny what they secretly feared. The woman's voice turned sharp. Where did you get that relic? Nyra's voice came rough. My grandmother gave it to me. A relic of the old bloodlines, the scarred man muttered, as if tasting poison. Nyra's skin prickled. What are you talking about? Auric took one step closer. The air between them tightened, the bond humming like a storm contained under skin. Nyra's breath hitched. Auric's gaze locked on the pendant, then on Nyra. Your grandmother, he said slowly, was she from the Crownlands? Nyra's mind flashed, an old woman with trembling hands, eyes full of fear and love and urgency. I don't know. She never said. The circle shifted again, unease crawling through their postures. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway, smooth, warm, almost amused. Oh, come now, it said. We're terrifying the girl. Every head turned. A man entered as if he owned the air. Lord Maelor Fenro. Nyra knew the name only because the guards at the gate had murmured it with a mix of reverence and relief when they ran for the king. He moved with a predator's ease, hands open, expression charming, eyes bright with false kindness. His cloak was pristine, fur-lined, untouched by snow. His boots had never known the borderlands. He smiled at Nyra as if greeting an honored guest. Nyra Valehart, he said. What a miraculous story you brought us. Auric's jaw tightened. Maelor. Cousin, Maelor greeted lightly. His gaze slid to the pups and softened in a practiced way. My poor little nephews. Nyra felt the bond in her chest twitch, warning, not affection. Maelor stepped closer to the bed. You must be exhausted, he told Nyra. Terrified. Surrounded by strangers interrogating you when you should be praised. Nyra didn't answer. Maelor's eyes flicked to the pendant in Nyra's hand. The smile didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. Tell me, Maelor said gently, when you found them, did you feel compelled? Nyra's breath caught. Because the truth was, yes. Sometimes her feet had turned before her thoughts did. Mailer's smile widened a fraction, like a lock clicking open. Ah. Auric's voice went cold. What are you implying? Mailer lifted his hands in mock innocence. Nothing. Only that the world is full of strange instincts. And the storm brings gifts, and traps. Nyra's skin went cold. Saley shifted subtly, moving closer to Nyra's side, protective. The circle murmured again, suspicion blooming. Mailer's gaze moved from face to face, measuring. Then he sighed, as if burdened by a secret too heavy to carry. I didn't want it to happen like this, he said, voice almost regretful. Auric stiffened. What did you do? Mailer's smile didn't reach his eyes. I arranged an ambush, he said calmly. Silence slammed into the room. Nyra's blood turned to ice. Mailer continued as if discussing weather. The queen was inconvenient. The heirs were obstacles. A kingdom needs clarity. A single line. A single ruler. Auric's face drained of color. You're lying. Mailer tilted his head. Am I? His gaze slid to Nyra again. And you, sweet Omega, you did exactly what you were meant to do. Nyra's throat tightened. Meant to? I nudged your instincts, Mailer said softly. Just enough. A whisper in the dark. A tug on whatever thread your pendant holds. I knew you'd find them. I knew you'd refuse to let them die. His voice warmed, almost admiring. And I knew you'd bring them straight to Whitegate, like a loyal little messenger. Nyra's body went rigid. The bond in her chest surged, hot and violent, as if Auric's rage had spilled into her blood. Mailer's voice dropped, pleasant as poison. You opened the gates from within. A distant horn blared outside, sharp, urgent. Then another. Footsteps thundered in the hall. Shouts rose, muffled by stone. The guard by the door snapped his head toward the sound. My king. The door burst wider. A soldier stumbled in, snow clinging to his armor, eyes wild with terror. They're here, he gasped. Hunters, silver-armed, at the outer wall. The room exploded into movement. Auric lunged toward the door, fury turning him into something larger than man. The circle surged behind him, barking orders. Saley's grabbed Nyra's shoulder. Stay with the princes, she hissed. Nyra's heart hammered. Outside, metal rang against metal. A scream cut through the air, short, brutal. Then the sound of gates being forced. Mailer didn't move. He simply watched the chaos unfold like a man watching the end of a play he'd written. Nyra's eyes locked on him. You brought them here. Mailer's smile returned, smooth as silk. I brought the end of uncertainty. The chamber door shook with impact. A howl rose, not mourning now, but war. And then the guards at Nyra's door turned. Not toward the hallway, but toward her. Nyra's blood went cold as one of them lifted his spear, eyes empty, expression wrong. Corrupted. Controlled. Mailer's voice was gentle. Bring me the Omega. Another crash. The door splintered. A silver-edged blade punched through the gap, gleaming like moonlight sharpened into a weapon. Hunters stormed in. They wore cloaks stitched with frost and bone, their faces hidden behind iron masks, their weapons bright with silver, metal that burned wolves and bonds and bloodlines alike. Nyra rose from the bed in a single motion. Karen and Solran woke at once, crying out, tiny bodies scrambling toward her. Nyra didn't think. She moved. She stepped forward and put herself between the princes and the invading steel. Her arms spread like a shield. The hearthstone pendant flared hot in her fist. Maelor's smile sharpened. The throne, he said smoothly, eyes on Auric's empty doorway, the Omega, and the heirs. Hand them over, and I might let your kingdom keep its walls. Nyra's voice came out low, trembling, not with fear, but with something waking. No, she said. Behind her, the princes pressed against her legs, their cries fading as her scent grounded them. In front of her, silver blades gleamed. And for the first time in her life, Nyra Valehart didn't feel powerless. She felt like a door had opened inside her. And everything that had been buried behind it was ready to come through. Steel and snow collided in the doorway. Hunters poured into the royal chamber like a flood of iron, masked faces, silver-edged weapons, boots tracking slush across sacred stone. The air changed the instant they crossed the threshold, thickening with something poisonous that made Nyra's skin crawl. Silver wasn't just metal. It was hate made tangible. Nyra held her ground anyway. Karen and Solran trembled behind her legs, their small cries cutting through the chaos like thin blades. She felt them searching for her, scenting, anchoring, and with every shaky breath they took, the thread inside Nyra tightened, pulling her toward something she didn't fully understand. A shield. A bond. A promise. Maelor's voice slid through the noise like silk dragged over bone. Such bravery, he murmured. Or such stupidity. Behind the hunters, two of Whitegate's own guards stood with hollow eyes and raised spears, turned against their king, against their walls, against their oaths. Corrupted. Controlled. Nyra's fingers clenched around the hearthstone pendant until the edges bit into her palm. The stone burned hot, pulsing like a living heart. She could feel everything. The fear in the room, sharp and frantic. The hunter's hunger, cold, disciplined, trained. The corrupted guard's emptiness, like something scooped them out and filled the space with Maelor's will. And beneath it all, Auric. His presence wasn't in the chamber yet, but Nyra felt him like thunder behind mountains. A storm building. Rage held back by skin. A hunter stepped forward, blade angled toward Nyra's throat. Move, he ordered, voice muffled behind iron. We'll take the pups alive. Nyra's mouth tasted like blood and frost. No, she said again, quieter this time, but steadier. The hunter's blade twitched. Maelor sighed, as if bored. Then cut her down. Carefully. I want what's inside her. Nyra's stomach turned. The hunter lunged. Instinct screamed at Nyra to duck, to scramble, to run. But there was nowhere to run that didn't leave the princes exposed. So Nyra did something she had never done in her life. She chose to stand. She lifted her hand, pendant glowing in her fist, and opened whatever door had been rattling inside her since the gates. Not wild panic. Not accidental rupture. Not grief spilling through cracks. This time it was deliberate. Nyra closed her eyes and reached inward, toward the deepest, oldest part of her, past hunger, past fear, past the years of being told she was nothing. She found it. A reservoir of heat and emotion and life force coiled like a sleeping animal. And she let it wake. The pendant flared. Light, golden and fierce, burst from between Nyra's fingers, spilling across the chamber in a wide, rippling wave. The fire in the hearth roared high, as if answering her. The torches along the walls flared bright enough to cast hard shadows. Then the wave hit the hunters. Not like a physical blow. Like a truth. Nyra's power slammed into them as a psychic shockwave, ripping through discipline and training in cruelty, dragging buried emotion to the surface like bodies hauled from ice. The first hunter staggered back, blade dropping as his hands flew to his helmet. A strangled sound tore out of him, half scream, half sob. "What?" he gasped, voice cracking. "No, no." Another fell to his knees, shoulders shaking as if he'd been struck. "I can't," he choked. "I can feel guilt, terror, betrayal." Nyra didn't choose what they felt. She didn't have to. She simply amplified what was already inside them until it became unbearable. The corrupted guards convulsed as if yanked by invisible chains. Their eyes widened, suddenly flooded with panic not their own. And then they broke. One guard dropped his spear and screamed, clutching his chest. "I didn't," he cried, voice raw with horror. "I didn't want." The other collapsed beside him, shaking violently as the control snapped and his own mind returned like a tide coming in. Mailer's smile faltered. "Just for a heartbeat." Nyra opened her eyes. The room stared back at her like she was a storm given human shape. Her breath came hard, but she didn't falter. Power hummed under her skin, bright and dangerous, threaded through the air like lightning. Cairn and Solren pressed against her calves, and calmed. Their tiny heartbeats steadied as if her power wrapped them in warmth. Nyra lifted her chin. "You can't take them," she said, voice low with certainty she'd never owned before. "Not from me." Mailer's eyes narrowed. "So the myths are true." He stepped forward, unhurried, as if he still believed this was his room, his game, his ending. "You think that makes you strong?" he asked. "A conduit? A pretty little hearth to warm wolves around?" He smiled again, but this time it was sharp. "I will carve that gift out of you and wear it like a crown." A roar shook the hall outside, deep, primal, not human. The chamber door shattered inward. And King Alric Fenro arrived. He didn't enter like a man. He entered like judgment. His eyes blazed with molten gold, the Alpha's mark burning bright. Snow clung to his shoulders and melted instantly from the heat radiating off him. His claws were out, his hands half-shifted, veins standing stark against his forearms. The bond between him and Nyra snapped tight like a drawn bow. Nyra gasped, not in pain, but in sudden overwhelming connection. Alric felt her power. And it fed his. The air around him thickened, charged, as if the entire fortress had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Every wolf in the room, circle member, guard, soldier, stilled under the pressure of his presence. Mailer's gaze flicked to Alric, amused. "Cousin." Alric didn't answer with words. He answered with a snarl that curled through the chamber like thunder. Mailer drew a blade, silver-edged, elegant, cruel. "I didn't want to kill you," he said lightly. "But you're making this tedious." Alric's smile was not a smile. It was bared teeth. "You murdered my mate." The words hit Nyra like a blow. Mate. Not romantic. Not chosen. A bond written into blood and grief. Mailer's expression flickered. "She was a symbol," he said. I removed her. That's all. Auric moved so fast Nyra barely saw it. One moment he was across the chamber. The next he was on Mailer. Claws met silver with a scream of metal. Mailer stumbled back, surprisingly strong, parrying with practiced precision. He wasn't just a schemer, he had trained for this. They crashed into the stone pillars, shattering carved edges, sending dust and sparks into the air. Auric fought like a beast unchained, rage in every strike, grief in every swipe. But Mailer fought like a man who believed destiny owed him victory. He slashed with silver, cutting Auric's shoulder. The scent of blood hit the air, hot, sharp. Nyra's power flared in response, the bond thrumming. Auric didn't slow. If anything, he grew more terrifying. His body shifted further, muscles swelling, shoulders broadening, his eyes burning brighter. The alpha inside him surged, amplified by Nyra's omega force like fire fed by wind. He caught Mailer's wrist mid-swing. Crushed. Mailer hissed through his teeth, pain finally cracking his composure. He drove a knee into Auric's ribs, twisting free, stumbling back. For the first time, Mailer's gaze held something real. Fear. He looked past Auric, past the circle, past the guards. To the princes. To Nyra. And Nyra felt the decision form in him like a blade being drawn. If I can't win the throne, I'll take what makes it legitimate. Mailer lunged. Not at Auric. At Cairn and Solren. Nyra's body moved before her mind did. She threw herself backward, scooping the pups close, turning so her spine faced the oncoming silver. Mailer's claws, silver-tipped, hidden beneath his gloves, raked across her back. Pain exploded. White-hot, blinding. Nyra cried out, the sound raw and torn, as silver burned through skin and muscle like fire through cloth. Her knees hit the stone. She felt warm wetness spread beneath her, felt her body trying to fold. But her arms held. Cairn and Solren were pressed safe against her chest, their small bodies shielded by her cloak and her bones. Nyra's vision blurred. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. The pendant burned like a star in her fist. Mailer drew back for another strike. Auric's roar shook the fortress. He hit Mailer from the side like a battering ram, slamming him into the wall hard enough to crack stone. Mailer snarled, whipping his blade up. Auric didn't dodge. He let the silver slice his forearm, let it burn, just to get close enough to end it. His claws sank into Mailer's throat. Mailer's eyes widened. For a heartbeat, he looked shocked, like a man who never truly believed consequences could reach him. Then Auric tore. Blood sprayed across stone. Mailer collapsed, choking on his ambition, hands clawing at nothing. His blade clattered to the floor, useless now. The chamber fell into a silence so abrupt it rang. Hunters, those still conscious, scrambled backward, stumbling over each other, their discipline broken by Nyra's power and their leader's death. Several fled, boots slipping on blood and slush. The corrupted guards lay sobbing on the floor, minds returned to them like a curse lifted too late. Circle members stood frozen, faces pale, eyes wide. And Nyra? Nyra sagged. The pain in her back grew heavier, dragging her down. Her fingers loosened around the pendant. Darkness pressed in at the edges of her vision. Auric turned from Mailer's body. The fire in his eyes dimmed when he saw her. He crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside her, hands suddenly gentle despite the blood on them. Nyra, he said, voice rough. Stay with me. Nyra tried to breathe. It hurt. Karen and Solren whimpered against her chest, noses nudging her chin, seeking her scent like a lifeline. Nyra forced her eyes open. She rasped. There. Alive, Auric said fiercely. Because of you. Sally's was there suddenly, hands pressing cloth to Nyra's back, murmuring orders to guards. Hold her, don't let her move. Nyra's body trembled. Cold and heat fought inside her. Her power flickered like a candle in wind. Auric's palm found her cheek. And the bond surged. Not violent now, steady. A pulse of warmth flowed from him into her, anchoring her, keeping her from slipping away. Nyra felt it, alpha strength pouring into the place she'd been torn open, holding her together through sheer will and connection. Nyra blinked, breath shuddering. She didn't die. Not that night. Not in that chamber. The kingdom did not lose its heirs again. And when dawn finally crawled gray and slow over Whitegate Hold, the storm outside softened into a steady fall of snow, as if the world itself was exhausted by violence. They convened the circle in the great hall 2 days later. Nyra stood only because Sally's and stubbornness held her upright. Her back was wrapped in thick bandages. Pain sat in her bones like a second skeleton. Every step reminded her of Silver. But the princes were well. Karen toddled clumsily across the dais, paws sliding on polished stone, determined to follow Nyra wherever she moved. Solren stayed close to Auric's boots, then darted back to Nyra with a soft whine if she drifted too far. No one could deny it now. They were bound to her. The circle of ash and oath sat in a half-moon of carved seats, their faces grave, their pride dented by truth exposed in blood. Mailer's body had been displayed in the courtyard at sunrise, proof to the kingdom that betrayal had a name and an end. The hunters' masks had been piled like discarded lies. And every whispered story that had once been dismissed as myth now stood breathing in the hall. A trueborn Omega. A broken history. A crown built on fear of what it could not control. The woman who had questioned Nyra before rose first. Her voice was careful now. Nyra Valehart, your presence has saved the royal line and unmade a traitor. For that, the Frostbound Crown owes you a debt. Nyra's hands curled at her sides. Debts don't keep people from being cast out. A murmur rippled. The scarred man leaned forward. You could be given gold. Land. Safe passage beyond our borders. Exile, Nyra said simply. The scarred man's jaw tightened. Safety. Sally's gaze cut toward him like a blade. Auric rose from his throne. The hall stilled. He looked tired, older than he should, grief still in the lines of his face, but his voice held iron. She is not being sent away, he said. The circle shifted uneasily. The woman held Auric's gaze. Your Majesty, the kingdom. The kingdom, Auric interrupted, was nearly stolen because we refused to look at our own rot. Silence. Auric turned to Nyra. His expression softened, just slightly. You were cast out for being different, he said. For being more than they could control. Nyra swallowed, pain and bitterness rising like bile. The woman spoke again, quieter. Then the choice is hers. All eyes turned to Nyra. The princes pressed close, Karen at her foot, Solren leaning into her calf. Their warmth grounded her. Nyra looked at the circle. At the throne. At the banners hanging overhead, wolves crowned in iron thorns. She thought of the border. The shove. The voices calling her worthless. She thought of 5 days in a blizzard, carrying life that didn't belong to her but somehow did. Nyra stepped forward until she stood at the center of the hall. My whole life, she said, voice rough but clear, I was told I was powerless. Her gaze swept the circle, steady, unflinching. I believed it, she admitted. Because it was easier than believing the truth. She lifted the hearthstone pendant, letting its dark stone catch the firelight. I was never powerless, Nyra said. Only waiting. The words landed heavy. The circle waited. Auric waited. Nyra looked at the open doors behind the hall, at the faint white glow of snow beyond. Freedom. Safety. Distance. Then she looked down at the princes. At the way they leaned toward her like she was home. And she understood something with terrifying clarity. Belonging wasn't given. It was chosen. Nyra lowered herself to one knee. Not in submission. Indecision. I choose the Frostbound Crown, she said. A breath swept through the hall, shock, awe, relief. Nyra lifted her chin. Not as your prisoner. Not as your reward. Her eyes found Auric's. As your truth. Auric stepped down from the throne and stood beside her. He didn't touch her, yet, but the bond between them hummed, steady as a heartbeat. Then rise, he said, voice thick. Royal Omega of Whitegate hold. Nyra rose. Cairn and Solrin crowded her feet, tails wagging, as if they understood the ceremony better than anyone else. Outside the hall, snow drifted down in slow, gentle silence, soft as forgiveness, cold as memory. Nyra stood beside King Auric Fenro with blood still in the stone of the fortress and truth finally in its air. A rejected Omega did not return to beg. She returned to rule. If this story caught your attention, subscribe so you don't miss the next tale.